think we've got everyone here. Everyone's sitting down. Welcome to the October edition of JoziPUG, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Keeping warm. Yeah, it's big change from the weekend. Okay, so just logistics for those online. Just make sure you're keeping yourself on mute, please. If you do have a question, though, raise your hand. We will try and keep an eye on it. We've got people monitoring the chat and that. So feel free to ask questions. Once again, we are uploading these to our YouTube channel, so if you do miss out on any, just go and check them out. Just want to thank Kavuma for tonight's sponsorship. They've sponsored all the refreshments and everything for later. So David, Manny, thanks to stay. Yeah. So tonight, we're going to cover in the news some exciting things happening. Then we've got Michael taking us through to 8 o'clock tonight on the AI stuff happening in Power Platform. Then after that, Rod's going to take us through linear workflows and why we shouldn't be using them, and then we'll have open floor discussions after that. Manny, do you think we should mention about the global bootcamp? Just so you guys are aware, we are busy planning the global Power Platform bootcamp for early next year. We did it the first time at the beginning of this year. It went really well. We're looking at improving upon that. The date so far is the 2nd of March. Okay. And it is going to be in the offices here. We're doing a lot of work to improve the experience, especially around making sure you can understand what sessions are happening, where and when they are happening, and all those details. So if you do want to get involved, let us know, and we'll take it from there. Okay. So some exciting things in the news. First thing, Ignite is this month. Okay, so registrations are open 15th to 16th. No, sorry, November, next month. Getting a year ahead. Lots of great announcements coming. There's some exciting things that we're going to be talking about in there. Definitely register, really worthwhile. Just go to ignite.microsoft.com and you can register online. Seattle has been sold out, I think, since the day that it opened. Okay. Now, some exciting news about M365 Copilot and low code. So we're making some advancements in the connectors that are available. So one, if you've already got a certified connector in the Power Platform, you can turn that into a plugin to be used in the Microsoft 365 Copilot suite, which helps extend those capabilities dramatically, and vice versa. So if you've built out a plugin for Microsoft 365, you can turn that also into a connector for the Power Platform to be used inside there. So this helps extend those capabilities. It makes it, firstly, a lot quicker and easier to get these plugins in M365 Copilot, as well as extending those capabilities into the rest of the Power Platform. Another exciting announcement. If you're a tenant level admin, you can now go and enable developer environments for your users. Okay, remember, developer environments don't consume any specific licenses. You can use premium connectors in there for free. Okay, so you don't have the same limits as you would in normal environments. They don't expire like the previous trial environments. So it's a great playpen for you to make use of. You'll see when you specify, when you're busy setting it up, you can create on behalf, you can specify the owner, and then you can allocate things like Dataverse and everything else inside there. So just another way to help your developers get more exposure and playing around with it. Shouldn't. Another one that's quite nice, and this has been something that's been coming for a while, the ability to delegate deployments. Okay, big challenge. Usually when you've got multiple environments, dev, test, and prod, you've got different permission sets. Usually in the past, if you wanted to deploy into an environment, you needed to make sure that you had the right permissions to do it. Now what you can utilize is the ability to deploy into there without needing to be an admin in that environment. Using SDN, so you can go in, deploy, move it into production, even if you don't have the rights to. But this is, of course, once the workflow is built out, the process is built out, you can enable those pipelines more effectively. So this way, you can help limit that control in those environments. There's also public preview on some connector enhancements. The one that's coming in is service principal authentication. So now you can authenticate against apps and services using SPNs. You can store this directly in Azure Key Vault, but this can be used for a number of reasons. Maybe you want to give access into a service, you don't want to give it directly to the users, you want to pull information through, you can enable that service principal support as well. We've also expanded the environment variables in policies. We've expanded now to scope environment variable, the custom connector policies as well. As we know, environment variables are useful, especially when you're doing deployments across multiple environments. You can keep your workflows and apps in one configuration and just change those environment variables as you go through. So we're expanding this in the policy enhancements from there. Okay, and I think that's it from here. Yeah. Anyone else pick up anything in the news or anything exciting that they want to talk about or mention? Oh, yes. Yeah. There. And what's nice about so just for those online, the Copilot component in Power Apps is there now. We've also expanded the number of records that Copilot can read and access. Yeah, it's virtually unlimited now. In the past, it was, I think it was 1,000 records. We've now expanded it out to cover more, which is really exciting. The new Power Apps homepage is also GA. So that's with the Copilot integration, creating apps from code and all of that. So that's also gone GA. Okay, thanks everyone. Mike, over to you.
Thanks. How do I make this longer? Okie dokie. Let's check if this works. All right. Okay, so this is going to be long. Sorry, what? I'm going to be I built this kind of like solution, which I'm going to show you right at the end, which allows you to build chatbots through configuration. But in order to show you that solution, there's some fundamental learning or understanding that you need to have. So I'm going to do the Mr. Miyagi thing and teach you wax on, wax off for a long time. And then you'll only realize why I've done that at the end. Okay, does that make sense? And that fundamental wax on, wax off is all around prompt engineering and Open AI and GPT. And specifically, we're going to go through some of this stuff here. So some fundamentals. At the end of this, I won't say you're going to be an expert, but you're certainly going to hopefully know a lot more than when you walked in. And you're going to understand topics like few shot, one shot. You're going to understand stuff like, does this thing have memory, yes or no, hallucination, large language model, etc. So there's some fundamental stuff I'm going to hopefully teach you. And then when you put it all together at the end, you're going to go, wow, Michael, you're amazing. No, you're not. You're going to say, wow, this technology is amazing. And hopefully you're going to have some awesome ideas in your mind of what you're going to go and build yourselves. Is that cool? Okay, so kind of let's start off here. So I'm not talking about openai.com. Okay, the public openai.com service. I'm not talking about that today, and I'm not talking about ChatGPT. Okay, I'm talking about Azure Open AI and some large language models that are available on Azure Open AI. So just as a bit of background, Microsoft has access to models that openai.com has developed over the years. For example, GPT and DALL-E. And these models you can run in your own Azure subscription. And that's what I'm going to be using. So in Azure, along with all the other AI services, I can go and instantiate an Azure Open AI instance that's in your own Azure instance or tenant. Does that make sense? Okay. So I can use these things in quotes, on your network as opposed to the public service. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And just to give you an example, this is, if I go to Azure portal and I go to like the AI section, as it were, on the left-hand side here, you'll see a whole bunch of AI services, and one of them is Azure Open AI. And I can go and click plus or create, and I can create an instance of Azure Open AI. When you do this, you will need to fill in a form because it's gated access. As part of being responsible, Microsoft wants to make sure that you're going to do something responsible with the service. And once you've been approved, then you'll be able to actually create an instance, set its location, etc. So I've already done that. I've got one over here, and these are good. When I click that service, I can then get into what's called the playground. And this is where I can go and test my, in quotes, my code, my prompt. And I can deploy models. So from here, I can deploy a model. For example, I can deploy the GPT 3.5 Turbo model, which is essentially GPT 3.5. Or you might have access to GPT 4 or DALL-E, etc. And so when I go and deploy a model, I'm basically giving it a name, and I'm saying what model do I actually want to use under the hood. I can set other parameters like how much I can call this thing per minute, so that you don't have developers, overutilizing the service, creating more cost than you expected, or just abusing it, or whatever it might be. So there's a few dials you can go and turn when you build a model or choose to create a model. We are getting GPT locally here. So when you deploy your Azure OpenAI instance, it asks you what region do you want to put it in. So at the moment, if you go and do that, you can choose various locations in the US and Europe. And what's coming soon to a cinema near you is the option to choose South Africa as a location for your Azure OpenAI instance. Okay. And then once I've got my instance, I can go and deploy models. Okay, so then we say, well, what on earth are you talking about, Michael? I've got a model. What do I do with it? What is a model? And this whole talk has been inspired by none other than Rod. So we had this huge conversation many months ago. He's like, what is this thing? Like, is it the Oracle? How does it know answers to questions? And so for the past 6 months, I've been exploring and trying to figure this stuff out. And so let's start off with the basics. When I talk about GPT, what is it? Well, it's a large language model. And the next thing you ask is, what's a large language model? And a large language model is essentially autocomplete on steroids. So on your phone, when you text someone, or WhatsApp them, I don't know what you do, and it starts suggesting words you should use towards the end of your sentence, and it says, oh, I think your next word should be this. It's auto-completing. That's a very small language model. Okay, this language model, GPT, is massive. Massive, massive, massive. So much so, it doesn't suggest words. It can suggest paragraphs. It auto-completes paragraphs for you. You just instruct it. It's an input-output model. I instruct it, and it gives me a response. What is that response? An autocomplete. And I know you don't believe me, so I'm going to prove it to you. So I'm going to go into the completions playground. Completions. Ah, it is autocomplete. It's completing. Aha. So the completions playground is where I go and test out my prompt or my instruction. I give it some instruction, it gives me something back, autocomplete. So if I walked up to you today and I said, a long time ago, so this is the developer kind of experience. You don't give this to users, right? This is where you go and play with your prompts. You test them out. So for example, if I do come in here, oops, sorry. Let's jump ahead. Let's try this again. Autocomplete on steroids. I'm doing this because I can get through this much faster if I use recordings. Okay. A long time ago. I hit generate. In a galaxy far, far away. It auto-completed. I didn't give it much instruction. If I generate again, I will probably get a different result. Okay. Cool. Maybe my instruction should be a little bit better than a long time ago. So for example, my instruction now is write a short story about a robot who came back from the future or back in time to find its creator. And I kept my typos in. And its creator is a pot plant. And then I changed it a bit, write a short story about a funny robot. Okay. And it's all about how you instruct it. In exactly the same way as I ask a human, the better I give context to the human, the better the result will be in terms of what I'm expecting. Create no more than 5 sentences, and then I'm just putting a story colon just to indicate where I want the response. Now I hit generate. Once upon a time, there was a robot from the future who was sent back in time to find its creator. After a long journey, it finally arrived, blah, 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 and it's written me a short story in no more than 5 sentences. The story wasn't very funny. You know why? Because I probably shouldn't have used the word funny. I probably should have used the word humorous. Words matter big time, big time. And so what I'm actually doing here is something called prompt engineering. And so you keep refining how you want it to behave by changing the words that you use. And words matter. Asking it to summarize and asking it to create your short description are 2 totally different things. Words matter. The other thing that matters in the top right-hand corner, there's something called temperature. That's your creativity dial. Somewhere between 0 and 1. 1, it's more creative. 0, not so creative. 1, more likely you're going to get a different response each time. 0, you're less likely to get the same response each time. Okay. It changes the behavior of your response. Temperature changes it. What you type changes it, your prompt. Happy so far? Good. I'm not allowing questions, so I'm carrying on. Okay. So that was generating a story. Not particularly useful, maybe, but maybe I could use this in the context of work, and I could ask it to create me an email. Okay, so I wanted to create me an email, so I've got to give it the instruction. So write a product launch email for a new television channel that focuses its content on green and renewable energy. I tell it that the customer's name is Seasware in the prompt, and he's a premium customer. Give me a subject line and body. Subject line, there we go. Dear Seasware, we are thrilled to announce it's generated me an email, but it stopped short. It stopped at who want. It never finished. Why? Because in the top right-hand corner, the max length, tokens represent, in a way, characters / words, and so it wasn't enough. So I need to tell it, actually, you can go further than that. I up the number, and now I get the email that I desire. If I hit generate again, the email will probably look slightly different. But it got it right. It even in here says, hey, you're a premium customer. Okay, that's pretty cool, but I don't want it as just plain text. As developers, whether low code or not, what's better is JSON. Respond in JSON format. So I'm essentially coding, aren't I? So I'm saying, hey, I want this in JSON format, and I want the key of subject and body. So I'm defining the schema of my JSON. Now I say response. And soon, I will have my launch email as JSON. Pretty cool. So what you can already imagine now, I could write a piece of code or a script that could cycle through my CRM database, find and replace that keyword there, Seasware, and the premium customer, and replace it with what comes out of my CRM database, and generate 40,000 emails and have Power Automate send them? Should you do that? Probably not. Why? Who knows exactly what it's going to write? So you've got to be very careful. So responsibly, and for the benefit of the company, it might suddenly start offering them discounts. So typically with this type of technology, there should be some type of human in the loop. So for example, if any of you have seen Microsoft 365 Copilot, inside of Outlook, you have the ability to create an email. This is what it's doing, but it's giving you the email. It doesn't hit send. You first read it, yes, I'm happy, I hit send. You make... Is it? Okay, is this making sense so far? So far I've proved to you it's autocomplete. I've proved to you that it's generative, it generates stuff. It's very particular about the words, your prompts, and how you ask it to do things. And so the result will depend on your prompt, and it will depend on tokens, and it will depend on temperature. Happy so far? Awesome. You are all at blue level. You're all at blue level. Give yourselves a clap. Okay, so let's get a little bit more funky. Let's see what else this stuff can do for us. So here's an article that I found just the other day on News 24. It's about Nepal playing cricket. I don't quite know, but it's a big article. And I'm not bothered to read this whole thing. So what I'm going to do here is paste it into the playground and ask in my instruction to summarize. It's very good at summarizing. Summarize the following news article. I could just end there, summarize the article, but words matter. So what's the main theme? Who are the key characters? Is this negative? Is this positive? How many players are mentioned in here? From what country are they? So here I've asked it to summarize. There we go. Nepal scores the highest ever runs in men's T20 international cricket. Pretty cool. And now I'll just go and change the prompt slightly and add, extract the players' names. Is it positive sentiment? Is it negative sentiment? I've used this quite successfully to analyze incoming email to a support mailbox. Is this a support issue? Is it a product query? Is it a sales request? What is this? It gets it very, very close to accurate. And then you can make your routing decision based on that. But if you ask for it as JSON, in your next step, let's just say it's Power Automate listening to a mailbox, then you call this, then your next step, you forward it to the right department. Or you tag that record in CRM, or your customer service module as support, sales, etc. Make sense? Are you excited? That's cool, isn't it? No, you can't. No, you can't. What's the question? So the question is on the sentiment analysis, can you ask it for a confidence score? Sure. It's all about the prompt. You can ask it to give it a confidence score, but you need to explain what a confidence score is. Give me a confidence score on how likely this is to actually be this. High, medium, low, 0 to 1. What do you want? Keep thinking about what if this was a human next to you and you're asking the human to do it. What would the human need to know in order to do it better? It's exactly the same. Don't make assumptions. Explain to it what you want it to do. Well, so for those on the call, the question is, but maybe it should come back to you and ask, well, what do you quite mean by that? Change your prompt to have that, and it'll do it. So in your prompt, you can say, if you don't understand what I'm asking, ask me. Let me know. And you'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's keep going. So what's this one? This one is dedicated to Rod, as far as I remember. Yes. Which is the best restaurant in Pofadder? What's the best restaurant in Pofadder? What would you say? Which one? Okay, so it's definitely KFC or Steers or Wimpy. Is this accurate? No, why is it not accurate? It's a language model that generates text. It's not factual. It might be. Coincidentally, it might be. But how do I make it factual? I give it factual information. Here's the review table. Here's the reviews. Using information in the table above, which is the best pizza restaurant? Randos, it's a pizza restaurant, not a chicken restaurant, and it's a rating of 5. Now it's accurate. In your prompt, you have to give it the relevant information. If I ask this thing now, how old is Queen Elizabeth? It will say 93 or 96, something like that. Is that correct? No, she's passed away. But if I copied and pasted the Wikipedia article about Queen Elizabeth and I put it into the prompt and my question said, based on the article below, how old is Queen Elizabeth? It will say, I'm sorry to say that she passed away on this date, this date, this date. GPT is just, in quotes, it's just as super underplaying it. It's a language model. It's good at language. It was trained on huge amounts of language content 3 years ago. So it might spew out language that makes complete sense, but it may not be factual. It may not be factual unless you ground it with real data. Okay, how do I ground it? You put it in the prompt. That's how you ground it. Okay. Are you enjoying this so far? Is this making sense? Okay. Wax on, wax off. Yeah. Okay, so let's try a few other things here. Okay, this is a great one. So the following table is in JSON format that shows the GDP per country. So here's each country and its GDP in the year. And I ask, which country has the highest GDP in the year 2021? And it says United States. Quickly, Bulldust. Bulldust. Why? There is no 2021 in here. So it got it wrong. If you don't know the answer or don't have the data for the answer, reply with I don't know. You are now at silver level. You were at blue, you're now silver for prompting. Okay. You've got to say this type of stuff. So when you're grounding it on factual data, you've got to say, don't make up the answer if it's not here. Rather respond with I don't know. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yeah, because you don't want to have necessarily every prompt go and write that in. Another thing you don't necessarily want to write into every prompt is don't talk about these topics. Yeah, don't talk about war. Don't talk about sexuality. Don't talk about whatever you don't want it to respond with. That's another thing you should put into the prompt to tell it what it can and cannot do. Yeah. Yes, sir. So does the model have memory? No. It will not apply for the future. I'm going to prove this to you in a second because I love to prove things that I say. Okay, but it's got no memory. No, if I do this again, it will not know this. I'm not teaching it. It's just, in quotes, a large language model. Okay. Yeah. You don't train the model. You don't train the model. To train this GPT model cost millions and millions of dollars. Nobody retrains the model other than OpenAI. Okay. You don't retrain the model, but what you do is you control it through prompting. Okay, and that's why this is so important. It's a new language. Okay, let me prove to you that it has no memory. So let's start again. You're going to have to follow quickly on this one. So I'm going to say a phrase, and I'm just going to say generate. Okay. So I'm going to put in a phrase. What a horrible day. What is it going to tell me? Who knows? I'm sorry to hear that. No, that's not what I was expecting. I wanted to say that's a negative statement. That's what I wanted. So now I've given it examples. I've said, this is awesome, that's positive. This is bad, negative. Now when I say, what a horrible day, it says negative. It now knows what I want because I gave it examples. Examples. And I'll clear it up and I'll start again. What a horrible day. I'm sorry to hear that. Can you see how it's got no memory? Okay, so there's two things you've learned here. It's got no memory, and the other one is something called examples. Prompting, the words matter, the temperature matters, examples matter massively. Often I write prompts and it's not doing what I want it to do, and as soon as I give it examples of what I want, for example, it's not spitting out the exact JSON format that I want, and I give it examples, then it's way more accurate. When you don't give it an example, it's called no shot. When you give it several examples, it's called few shot. Okay, so have you ever heard those terminologies? So I'm giving it examples. Next thing you're going to learn is something called fine tuning. Okay, how do I tune this thing? What happens if I want to say what a horrible day, and I don't want to give an examples, and I do want it to say negative? I fine tune it. So fine tuning is you can give it a huge amount of examples, and then you get a new model name, essentially. And then when you call that model, in the top there's a little drop-down box, your deployment. When I call it and I now just say, what a horrible day, it'll say negative. So fine tuning is not giving it knowledge, it's giving it examples. Okay, does that make sense? Still having fun? Okay, so let's talk about chat. So how do I create chat? Because all I'm showing here is one input, one output, but I want to have a conversation. So I'm going to teach you about chat, and then I'm going to tell you not to do what I'm doing here. Okay, so the way that the chat works is there's this kind of schema called ChatML. And the way it works is you say system, and then you give it instruction overall of how you want this thing to behave. It's like a system instruction. So I say, you're an order bot. Here's the menu. Allow people to make an order, but only order from the menu. And then I've got your assistant. In other words, it must respond now. And when I click generate, it says, you're a virtual assistant for a... No, that's not what I want. What I want it to do is offer me the menu. And the reason this isn't working is I've got the wrong model. I've got a text Da Vinci model, which is not fine-tuned for ChatML. So I changed my model to the turbo model. I also changed something called stop sequences. In other words, when it starts generating, when it sees those phrases, it must stop generating, otherwise it could generate more than I want. So now I say, okay, the user is essentially typing this. So you can imagine a user interface on top of this. The user types, I would like to order food. The assistant responds with, great, welcome to our pizza restaurant. What would you like to order? Cool, let's carry on this conversation. Now remember, this is a dev tool, right? So that you can imagine a user interface on top of this, ChatGPT. And I say a burger, please. And then I say, okay, assistant, your turn now. What does the assistant say? I'm sorry, but we don't serve burgers at our pizza restaurant. However, we have great selection of pizzas. Would you like to hear the options? And I go on. And I'm creating a dialogue of a conversation based on the system prompt right at the beginning, telling the bot how it should behave and what it should do. And it will use natural language to have a full-on conversation with me based on the instructions I gave it at the beginning. Yeah, so if you just stop with the word assistant, basically we're saying, okay, it's over to you now, you generate. Assistant does mean that. It's been fine-tuned. This is called ChatML. User means the end user, assistant means you. Predefined. This. And then, so which pizza would you like to order? Off I go. Now, don't use ChatML. Okay, it's essentially being deprecated. So you don't use ChatML. What you use is a different structure, which I'll show you in a minute. But in the left-hand side, instead of being in the completions playground, I choose a different API called the Chat API. Okay, it's a slightly different API. But in this API, okay, they've built a UI on top of this, but we'll look at what it looks like under the hood in a minute. But here's the system message, that exact same system message I showed earlier on. And then as a user, I'm saying, okay, I'd like to order food. It says exactly the same stuff. I want a hamburger. Sorry, we don't serve hamburgers. Now, if I view the code, this is giving me a sample of how I call this thing via code. And so via code, essentially, the endpoint has a chat keyword in, and I forgot to show you earlier on, I went over it too fast, but the completions playground doesn't have the chat keyword in. And what you'll see here is essentially a JSON structure that represents the conversation. So you'll see role, then it was system, and then the system message, and then role user content, role assistant content, role user content, role assistant content, and off it goes. So that essentially replaces the ChatML schema. And this is how, if I was going to write code, whether it was JavaScript or whatever it might be, that's the endpoint I would call, and I'd pass it that. DALL-E generates images, creates images. There's also an endpoint here. It gives me sample of how I go and call that endpoint and get it to generate what I want it to generate. Yes, brilliant question. So to keep the chat conversation going, so it's called multi-turn. It has a turn, I have a turn, it has a turn, and what I ask, it knows the full context of the conversation before. I have to send the entire conversation every time because it's got no memory. And that's how you give it memory, is you return the entire conversation each time. That's why when you look at, for example, the public chat GPT, and if you build your own chat UI on top of this, at some point you need to end that conversation and clear it out because it just gets too long. It just gets too long. Yeah. Yes, sir. So earlier on I talked about temperature. I talked about your end tokens, your end phrases, but there's something called token size. And token size is what's the maximum amount of input I can give it, and what's the maximum size of output it will give me. And depending on what model you have, it supports a different size of input. Input still, doesn't matter which model, is not massive. So my prompt can't be 60 pages. It can't be the whole internet. It can't be the whole internet. So how do I make this thing work with like complex scenarios? I hope that's what you're thinking. We'll get to the answer. Okay. It's not just good at English, it's also good at other languages such as Python and C# and JavaScript and SQL. So here I'm asking it to generate me a SQL select statement. So what I'm saying here is, cool, you're a SQL expert. Generate a SQL select statement. Do not make an insert and update or delete statement, only a select statement. This is the table schema. Here's 3 example records. And the user question is, how many claims are there? And what it should do is generate me a SQL select statement. It's pretty good. Who are the people who have made claims? Select customer name from claims table. Why am I showing you this? Yeah, it's cool to help you write SQL statements. But imagine this in a solution. Yes, because let's think of it this way. Maybe I've got a data set that's got 1 million records. I can't put 1 million records into the prompt. So when someone asks a question, what I can do is I can get it to generate me a SQL select statement. Then I can execute the SQL select statement, which might only return 10 records. And then I put those 10 records in the prompt. Now it can answer the question of who has made claims. It can answer that question now. But you'll see, so what I'm saying here is often what happens with this type of model is it's not just call GPT, get a response back. Often there's an orchestrator. I need to first call it and ask it to generate me a SQL select statement. Then I'm going to go and execute the SQL select statement. Then I'm going to take the stuff back and I'm going to create a new prompt and I'm going to send it back and I say, okay, give this to me in English. So I can have multiple things like this. Another example is maybe you've got policy documents. You know, in HR, maybe there's 400 policy documents or manuals, procedures. And I want to ask questions like, how many leave days can I take each year? How do I stuff all those policy documents into a prompt? I can't. So what do I do first? Search. So first, I have to execute a search against a corpus of content for policy, for how many leave days can I take each year. Then the search engine, whatever it is, Google, Bing, SharePoint search, Azure Cognitive Search, whatever the search engine is, it returns maybe 10 records. Then I take those 10 records and I put it into the prompt, and the prompt reads something like this. Based on the user's question, look at the information below and answer it. So let's say the user's question was, how many leave days can I take each year? Within that context or in that content, somewhere there should probably be some text related to how many leave days they can take each year. And so the result is only as good as search. 100%. That's exactly when you have to say, if you don't know, answer I don't know. Otherwise, it'll give you an answer that's not accurate. Okay, makes sense. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so how on earth do I use this from the Power Platform? Okay, so the first example I'm going to do is show you a Power App. So let me just first show you the prompt, and then I'll physically dive into the Power App. So here's the prompt. The scenario is I've got audit findings, and I want to ask questions of my audit findings. So here's the prompt: create a summary of the audit findings below, and I list several audit findings. And then it gives me a response. Highlight key issues into bolded headings. And so here's the response. It's read my audit findings, and it gives me the response. Happy? But I want to parameterize this because this is great. I've tested it. I'm happy with my prompt. But how do I get real findings into it? Okay, so let's do this. Let's actually dive out of here and go into a real live demo. Real live demo. And I have to use one hand, and I hate this. No, it's fine. I'm good. I'm not going to write too much code. Is that coming through? Okay, so what I've got here is a Power App. And this Power App, I've got audit findings. They're in a database. It's called the Dataverse. And the table is called audit findings. And then I've taken this gallery control. And if I look at this gallery control here, it's bound to the audit findings table. Happy days? Great. What I'm going to do is when I click this button, go, I'm essentially going to loop through each audit finding and create a string. Okay. Audit finding, carriage return. Audit finding, carriage return. audit finding carriage return. So it'll just keep doing that. Happy? And then I'm going to wrap around that the following text. Create a summary of the findings below. Highlight key issues into bolded headings. Carriage return, findings, colon, and then my string actually of my audit findings. I've just generated a prompt that will be different every time I run the application, right? Or it depends on who's using it or what audit findings they select, etc. And then I'm going to say run. What is this? Is a Power Automate flow. So I've got a Power Automate flow, and this flow accepts just a prompt. So this prompt here. If I look at the flow, in comes that prompt. This is it here. And now, what do? We call Azure Open AI. And your Azure Open AI model has a URL. Yeah. It's got your API key. Do not write this down. This is my key. I will change it afterwards. And then I'm passing in my prompt. There's my prompt. My temperature of 0. I want it to be 0. There's no stop words. Maximum tokens 1024. It's just what I chose. It's then going to respond. I'm not going to go through all the details of that of the JSON response, but then I send it back to the Power App. Happy? Okay, so let's run this. Underneath this, I've got an HTML control, and the response from that Power App I just set as a variable, which that control is bound to. It didn't quite format the way I wanted it to. Let's change something. Yeah, I'm going to put the mic down for this, just so I can type. Hold on. Format results as HTML. That's my prompt. I don't want it as JSON. I want it as HTML. That's very cool. No. Not awesome yet. Wait, watch this. Let's change this a bit. You should always be responsible. Okay, so let's change this slightly. So what I'm essentially doing now is I'm injecting into the prompt. So what I'm doing is it says, okay, use the findings listed below and answer the user's question. The user's question is in the text box now. And then it's the findings. Okay. Now we can ask questions of my data. Hold on. I could spell this wrong. How many findings are there? Wax on, wax off, eh? We're there now. Create me a HTML table with the findings using common rules of I don't know, I'm just making this up. Okay, so I've just created an intelligent app using Azure Open AI. Those of you that have seen, and we spoke about it earlier on, there's a new control coming to Power Apps called the Copilot control. Essentially, I've just created the Copilot control. What's going to happen with the Copilot control, you're going to put it in, and then you're going to choose what data source it's related to, and then you can ask questions of that data. What's it doing behind the scenes? This. It's actually not, technically speaking, because what I'm doing here will work well with firefighters. If I've got 10,000 in my database, my prompt's going to be too big. And so what I actually need to do first is some type of select statement. I need a different way of first only getting what I really need and then asking GPT to do the work on it. So it's working slightly differently. It's under the hood is actually generating selects, actually filter statements to filter data and then do it. So it's much smarter than mine. But how cool is this? Okay, I've got an app that shows me case data, huge amount of case data. Create a summary button to allow people just to summarize what that case is about. You can think of so many scenarios that you can enrich your applications with stuff like this. Happy? Okay. Now I'm going to call it 10 minutes to go to the ultimate solution, which is how do I use this thing from Power Virtual Agent? How do I use this from Power Virtual Agent? And actually, the architecture is no different. Because Power Virtual Agent, I use a Power Automate flow. Yeah? Okay, but let's just, before we get there, let's just back up a bit. Oh, come on. Okay, that's the Copilot control I'm talking about. Looks much better than mine that I just built, but nevertheless. Okay, Power Virtual Agent. So there's different ways to use Power Virtual Agents to use Azure Open AI to use a GPT model. This is the first one. This has been around for a while in preview. And essentially what you do is you just go and put URLs to content. You can put a URL to a public-facing website or to a SharePoint library or SharePoint site. And then instantly I can go and ask questions of that data, just like I did now. And that's all you do. You do change temperature, by the way. They just don't call it temperature. They call it over here your content moderation. Should it be low, medium, or high? In other words, how creative should it be? But that's actually affecting temperature. You don't get to choose your Azure OpenAI instance because it's using a Microsoft one behind the scenes. And you don't get to choose the prompt. Behind the scenes, Microsoft's creating the prompt automatically for you and getting results. How's it getting results? Before it executes give me the answer to this question, it's doing a search. If it's a public URL, the first thing it's actually doing behind the scenes is a Bing search. So in order for this to work, for example, on your public-facing website and ask questions of your public-facing website, your public-facing website needs to have been indexed by Bing. If it's an internal site like a SharePoint URL, it has to have been indexed by SharePoint. Okay. And so it first actually under the hood does a SharePoint search. It gets a result back based on the content of your documents, and then it uses GPT under the hood to give you an answer to your question. It works fairly well. I can have a SharePoint library of manuals. I can have a SharePoint library of policy documents, and I can ask questions like how many days can I take each year? But you don't have lots of dials to turn, which is a good thing, but maybe it doesn't give you the control that you want. Yes, sir. So the question is if I've got a public-facing website and I've said search engines don't index this, this will not work. Yeah, so Bing will not have, like if you've got no robots or whatever, I can't remember the tags that you put in HTML websites, but if it hasn't been indexed by Bing, it will not show up. Also, if Bing indexed your site 3 years ago, the responses will be from that index of 3 years ago. And I've had this in a few scenarios where ask questions like, demo, it's amazing. Who are the directors of this company? And it gives me the directors because it's on their website. They're like, those aren't our directors. And then I go to their website and it's not their directors. But then if I go and actually Bing it, I see that There the information is wrong. So the index is old. So that's the first way. I'm going to answer your question. You're going to answer the question yourself. That's one way. The next way, and sorry, just before I get into this, I'm not covering the basics of normal PVA. Not using Azure Open AI and having conversations and building out conversations with PVA. That's a whole nother topic. I'm just specifically talking about Azure Open AI. Okay, so another way is actually, remember I was in the Azure portal earlier on, and I showed you the chat. Just above completions was chat, and I showed you how the pizza ordering scenario. You can go to the top right-hand corner and you can say deploy to, and you can say a new Power Virtual Agent bot. Pretty cool. That's pretty cool. There's some more story behind this, which I'm not going to get into now because of time. But what that essentially then means is in Power Virtual Agent, under your create generative answers action, if I go and select to edit that action, I'm going to show you what it's going to do. So I can still ask the question of a leave policy document. So earlier on, I talked about public websites and SharePoint, but underneath that, you'll see there's a new thing there called Azure Open AI Service. And here I can change the connection to which Azure Open AI instance. What's the deployment name? How many tokens? What's the temperature? I can even go and change the prompt, the system prompt. Now I've got more control. And now I can go and interact with that prompt and order pizza. Okay, now this is the crescendo moment. This is like, I don't want to do either of those. I want to build this whole thing myself. Okay, I want to call the Azure Open AI instance myself through Power Automate. So essentially, I've got, you earlier on saw a Power App on the left-hand side. Now that's Power Virtual Agent. And then my orchestrator, the thing doing the work, is Power Automate. And in my case, I want to do different scenarios. And the one scenario is I do want to ask questions of a leave policy document as an example. And that has been indexed by Azure Search. So into Azure Search, I've pre-indexed a whole bunch of documents. And so the first thing it needs to actually go and do is query that search. Get a search set of results back, inject that into the prompt, pass it to Azure Open AI, get a response and get back to the user and say you can take X amount of days leave according to the policy. Make sense? And what I used to do when I used to demo this and create this is every time I built out that Power Automate flow, I would do it differently because every person that asked me to do it had different requirements. Okay. So then I thought, no, we'll stop doing this, stop rebuilding it every time and create a generic solution where this whole thing is configurable. So that's what I'm going to show you now, and then I'll show you the Power Automate flow. Happy? Okay. Do I still have time, Rod? Okay, so what I came up with, and I'm not saying this is the way you should do it. I'm not saying that. Okay, it's a sample. I'm going to make it publicly available so you can have it if you want. But it's more like, I think of it more as a learning tool to learn how you might want to do this in a low-code platform. There's different techniques that orchestrator. The thing I'm using is Power Automate. If you're a developer, what you'll probably use there is something like LangChain or Semantic Kernel. So these are SDKs that make it much easier to communicate with a large language model and do multiple tasks and actions. But I didn't want to do that. I'm a low-code guy, so I used Power Automate. So anyway, and I wanted it totally configurable. So what I did is I built this little model-driven app. And basically what it allows me to do is instead of hard coding the prompts, all the Azure endpoints, they're all configurable. So I can give my bot new Azure OpenAI skills by just configuring it here. And I broke it down into 3 different categories. The first category is data. I want to ask questions of data. How many claims are there? Who made the claim? So I just come in here and I say new, and I fill in a form, and then I can use data type queries where I actually generate the select statement, I execute the select statement, I get a result set back, etc. And so if I want to change the prompt, I just change it in here. So you can imagine the Power Automate flow is reading this, right? It's getting the prompt out of here. So there's my main prompt. There's my schema for the table to help it be better. I can change my temperature, and I can tell it what endpoint to use in Azure Open AI. And that's where I go and define my endpoints there. Because I can have different endpoints, different models that I want to use for different scenarios. The other one I created was the concept of knowledge. So I want to ask questions of policy documents, manuals, all these things. So I just click new and I give it a new skill. So for example, I've got one here called HR published documents. And so here's the prompt. You're an intelligent human resources employee assistant helping Contoso, blah, 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 blah. So I'm telling it how it must behave. I can change the temperature, the endpoint. I'm not going to get into all that detail there, but how does this work under the hood? Remember, it's first got to do a search. And the results is only as good as the search. So what I can do is I can also change the way search works, because it turns out that search is not search is not search. And you can get different results depending on how you do search. So for example, Azure Cognitive Search, when you search against the index, you've got different types of search. There's something called semantic search, which is actually mostly in these cases better. But you also have something called simple search, which is just keyword based. And you have something called vector search, which we're not going into today at all. But so I can change the way that search works, which is quite cool. I can also test my search. So I built this little Power App that allows you to test your search, because if it's only as good as your search result, your search better be good. So I want to be able to just test my search against those HR documents. And for example, maybe I want to search for Christmas. Ah, sorry. Thank you. And so it's a Power App. It's calling Azure Search. And so I can see the responses that it gets back. I asked for 5, and if I scroll down, there are another 4. And this is just a way that I can test it. So that's pretty cool. Search is super important in this context. We'll come back to that one in a second. The other one is, I don't want to query data, whether it's database or something in a search. I want it purely prompt-based. Remember my food order? So all I have to do is go in here and just type my prompt. So here's my food order prompt. What endpoint must it use? What temperature, etc. I also had this concept of adding examples. Why? Because examples make it better. And the reason I did that is because at the end of the conversation, I want the order as JSON. So at the end of the conversation, once it's taken the order, give me the order as JSON so I can then go and place the order in my system, or the complaint, or whatever it is that this bot is doing. Make sense? Okay. Should we test it out? So this is all one Power Platform solution. I'll put it on GitHub. You can download it and you can get going. And so the bot in here is called Chetty. It's Chatty. Okay. My names of bots are terrible. And so what it does is, the first thing it does is it actually this is not something you would give a user, right? You wouldn't give them this UI. You wouldn't ask a SQL question, a knowledge question, but it just helps me test my scenarios and do demos. So should we start with ask a SQL question? So when I say ask a SQL question, it should give me, if I go back here, it should give me 2 options, claims and support incidents. Because it's reading the Dataverse, this table, and it's giving me the options. Claims and support incidents. So I give it a new skill just by adding a new one. So I say, let's do a claims. Okay, what would you like to know? Who made claims? So what's happening is a Power Automate flow is asking it to generate a SQL select statement. It generates a SQL select statement, which is select top 5 customer name from claims. For my testing purposes, I didn't want just to execute it without me saying, yeah, go ahead and do it. So I'm saying, yes, execute it. And I promise you, this is a live SQL database with a claims table, and it's now executing that query. It's a Power Automate flow doing that. And Power Automate gives you this back. It's not pretty. So then I send another prompt saying, okay, so what's the answer to that question, then it gives me the answer. Henry Brown, Kamalo Vusi, Sizwe, etc., and James Garcia made claims. Okay, so here you can see it's linking to the Power Automate flow. Make sense? Okay, so should we do knowledge question? And so now it should list the different knowledge topics. So let's do HR published documents. I've got two versions of this using different search techniques just to play around. So what's my question? And the documents in this index is my leave policy. Okay, there's actually a lot more, but let's try it out. Hopefully it gives me the right answer. And this is also multi-turn. So it is, every time I ask the question, it's creating like a variable, which is the full history of the conversation and passing that to Power Automate every time. And then Power Automate is sending that to Azure Open AI. So I've got the full conversation history. So it'll have context if I now go and say, and what about Easter? Yes, so this is a brilliant question. So what am I actually passing to search? Search, I'm actually passing, do we close for Christmas? And it's returning 5 or 3 results, depending on how many I ask it to return. And because I'm using semantic querying, it's actually pretty accurate. Now, what comes interesting is the second time I ask a question. Because I say now, what about Easter? Now, if it just sends that to search, so what I actually have to have in this Power Automate flow, and this is that orchestrator piece, right? What I'm actually doing is saying, if I have history, I'd use another prompt. And the prompt says, the pseudo prompt is this. Look at the conversation above and look at the user's new question. Generate a new search clause for me. It gives me a search clause. I execute that search clause, get the result set back, then pass it to GPT and say, answer the question. Yeah. Yes, Tabo. Is you going to read it or is it?
Yeah, hi, gents. I think my question is going to derail you a bit, so maybe you can answer it a bit later. But what I want to find out is you did say that there is a gateway in terms of a form that needs to be filled out to get access to the OpenAI. So maybe we can just elaborate a bit on that at the end on how to get that access. And then 2, it's very nice that you're talking about this topic because we actually had a customer recently who is utilizing the Azure AI OpenAI application, right? And then the issue that they had was that they were recommended by Microsoft that their data sits in their blob storage in Azure. Now, is that true? Or can your data sit anywhere else, like you just mentioned now, in SharePoint or the likes? And if it is sitting in SharePoint, does it read document data or is it reading line data? So is it reading the records or can you just save whatever information on particular documents somewhere and then it will read off those documents, or does it need to be text in terms of line data? I'm not sure if that makes sense.
It makes sense. So the answer is it depends. It doesn't have to, your content can sit anywhere. You know, you saw me interacting with content that's in SQL. Your documents can be in SharePoint. They can be in Azure Index. It doesn't matter where your content is. The question, it's, you know, could you have it as a non-digital? No. But the question is, you know, how do you fetch that data, you know, as part of this orchestration? And so depending on where it is today, there's different approaches. So it depends. I can't answer that. You know, maybe for their scenario, Azure Blob was best. I don't know. I really don't know. Okay, cool. Oh, okay, cool. Thanks. And Jonathan is in the IM window, shared the link to get access to Azure Open AI. I'm going to, at a high level, show you one of the Power Automate flows there. So I'm not going to show you the SQL one, and I'm not showing you the last one, which was just the prompt, the food order. But you saw the food order there. It's exactly the same food order. I was ordering a hamburger, and it said no, and then I said cool pizza, and off I go through the whole thing. But this is the most complex one. So this is getting the actual prompts from the Dataverse, which is you are this type of bot helping people with this type of thing. And you'll see here I've got stuff like, okay, if there's no chat history, then don't do anything. But if there is chat history, I have to generate a new search query based on the previous search. Yeah. And then I get a new search query. Then I go and execute the search against Azure Open AI. Ignore the left-hand side. You just look at this one. So here I actually go and execute the search against Azure Search. So you'll see everything's parameterized. I'm not hard coding a URL to any service, a key to any service. It's all in the config of the app. And so now it's going to go and execute that search. There we go. What's the actual search it's executing. This will come back with results. How many results? Well, the number that I configured in my app. Then it's going to take those results. It's going to inject them into the prompt. And then down here, it's actually going to go and call GPT, Open AI model, whatever it is, execute it, get the results back, save it into a history variable, send it back to Power Virtual Agent. It's the most complex you could probably do. Hence, wax on, wax off. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's not ready for production. I don't have any error handling in here, which David I know is teaming out right now. Logging, etc., etc. But for the most part, in my demos, it works great. So now I can just build really cool chatbots instantly because all I have to do is write a prompt. I do it using my model-driven app instead of hard coding it somewhere. And I've been extremely rude to Rod because I've just, like I said, oh, this will be 5 minutes, this will be 5 minutes, and I've gone on. At the end of the week, I'll put it up. It's not there now. End of the week, there's something else in that app that actually allows you to upload documents into the index. So usually when you have to index something, you've got to write script for Azure Search. So now I've created a little Power App UI in that model-driven app that allows you to upload documents into the index. Either you can point it to a SharePoint file or you can point it to an Azure Blob location. And everything here is low code except for that piece. The actual indexing is being done by an Azure function. So there is an Azure function that actually does the cracking open of a PDF. It's a little bit more complex than just giving a PDF in its entirety to Azure Search. You actually have to break it down into chunks to make it more meaningful and stuff like that. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about that. The idea is I've just got a UI. I can upload documents. Here's some manuals. Here's some policies. I can go and just define a prompt in the admin UI, and then off I go. I've got this chatbot. No, it's taken long. 6 months. not so much the building, it's more the understanding it's taken long. And I've tried to brain dump all of that to you in like under an hour. So well done. You are now all gold. You all make gold. Any other questions? Rod, do you want to go? Or okay. Hand over to Rod. The session is recorded, so you can rewatch it. YouTube.
Question for you online, Mark. But these are all, if you're putting this in an app, it's all premium connectors, regardless.
In the custom solutions that I showed, the Power App and the final demo that I did, that's all using in Power Automate an HTTP connector to call Azure Open AI. That's a premium connector. So that's firstly important to understand. And a PVA that you get with M365 does not include the ability to use premium connectors. So there's also the out-of-the-box ones that I showed as step 1 and 2. The licensing for those two hasn't been announced yet. So we don't know what licensing is required for that, because those are both actually still in preview.
Sweet. Yeah, so now I've got to follow Mr. Miyagi here. So I'll keep it short and sweet. This is not an expert level thing. I suppose it's more of an intermediate whatever. I'm not doing cool demos and teaching you how to do crazy ninja stuff. This is kind of basic architecture-y stuff that I think is true. And if I am talking cuck, please do tell me, because it'll help me out. Sound good? So stop using linear workflows, how to get good. That's what we're all trying to do. I'm Odd. I work as a principal consultant at Mint Group. You can find me online in places, and I'm a giant nerd. What is a linear workflow, and why do we not want to do them? Easiest way to do that is to show you guys is to look at a quick case study. Super basic. I'm sure we've all had prompts like this. Somebody comes to you, oh, the users need to log in, capture some information, and it gets approved twice. Two-step approval. Nice, easy, simple, right? So how do we build it? It's the easiest way to build it, right? Is in a linear way. It's really, really basic, right? We have a trigger. We got a Power App. You capture it into SharePoint list, workflow triggers. When the item is created, great. Super easy. Then we can run through 2 approval steps. We can use the out-of-the-box approval action. Does it all for you, right? And then after that, we just want like a notification to the user saying it's done. We can send them an email, Teams, whatever. Super easy. Who's built a workflow like this? I have, right? Because it's brilliant, right? It's nice and quick. You do it in flow. You've got one list. You've got Power App with one screen, and you've got one flow. Super easy, done. I'm telling you not to do this. Why am I telling you not to do this? Because they will always come back to you and say, oh, yeah, that's great. I wanted to do some other stuff now. Right? And now we get in trouble because now they're like, oh, we want to delegate all the approvals. So somebody's on holiday, they can give it to somebody else, right? We actually need Sue to put in more information between approvals 1 and 2, right? We've got to audit everything. If the approval fails, they need to be able to send it back to the last person, ask them why, and do all of that, right? And actually, that's not how the process works. There's this giant list of exceptions for every executive because they don't follow the process that everybody else does. So now we've got our workflow. How do we deal with this? Okay, so delegation, you can kind of do using out-of-box approvals, right? You can send it to a group rather than a person. So that kind of works. So that, okay, that's cool. Auditing, okay, well, we can create an audit list. Every time we do anything, we can have the workflow then write to the audit list. Okay, so yeah, we can do that. Additional information and the process exceptions. Well, you can't really wait between the approval steps and do like wait for somebody to capture information. So okay, well, we'll split them up into different workflows now, right? And then depending on the status, we can do that. And sending it back for rework, I'm sure we'll figure out something. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Right? So now our trigger is, okay, when an item in this list is created or when it's modified, right? And we can put a condition on that so it only runs, the status is right and all of that. And then we can send it to the first approval and we'll use the approval action to the group rather, right? Cool, so that's fine. Then we can do like another trigger like that, and then it'll send somebody a link to the Power App to capture the additional information. Cool, so we can do a deep link there. Cool, so we can do that. And then we'll have another workflow for the other approval, another workflow for the final notification, right? Then we need one for the exception, one for another exception, and one for another exception. And suddenly our nice, clean little workflow has got like 1,000 components, and it's held together with duct tape and bubble gum, right? So that sucks. So how do we avoid this? We build everything in a nonlinear way. Makes it way easier. Same case study, right? We get given this. Cool. How do I build it? Well, I'm going to have a trigger. I'm going to trigger it from Power Apps, right? Because I want to control what's happening. And I'm a control freak and I like Power Apps. So when they go capture the information, Power Apps will trigger the flow each time I want to do it, right? Then I'm going to put on a switch. That switch is going to be on the workflow status. I'm calling workflow status. You can call it whatever you want because you're triggering it from Power Apps and you can call that column whatever you like, that data point. Then we do a switch. So we've got one switch for approval 1, one switch for approval 2. I'm also going to manually control these tasks in Power Apps. I'm not going to use the approval action in 0365 because it doesn't give me enough control. And as we've just established, I'm a control freak. Right, so I'm going to have my own task list and I'm going to have to control those statuses myself. It does complicate the flow a bit. And then I've got my notification one, right? Depending on the workflow status. So this solution is more complicated than the linear one, right? I've got an extra list. I've got more screens in my Power App and my flow is a bit more complicated. Why would we ever do this? Well, when the additional requirements come along, I want to do delegation, auditing, I want to set back to whatever stage it's in, that's already all handled because I'm doing the task control manually, right? I need more information captured. I need process exceptions. I can just add another branch onto my existing workflow. Now, if you have 1 billion exceptions, you still do need 1 billion branches, and that's a people problem, not a technological problem. The way you solve that one is with communication skills. This gets a lot easier, right? So here's my flow, and I can say, okay, well, I'll just add another branch with a capture mechanism. Then this changes, and when I kick it off at whatever step, changes in the app, nice and easy. Yeah, of the workflow status. Yeah. Yeah, my workflow status is new. Comes in the trigger switch like, okay, this is a new one. I'm going to do this approval step. I'm going to make that task. I'm going to do. Yeah. And if you guys want like a technical walkthrough of a solution that's doing this task thingy, I can do that at some point. So we can add that in there and then our exceptions, all right, we can just keep adding branches and we don't have to rejigger everything and end up with 1,000 different ones. So now my solution components are exactly the same. So they've got more complicated, but I haven't had to rebuild everything. It's way more manageable. It's easy to see if it falls over, right? So I'm just saying, don't use linear workflows, right? Have a considered design before you just build it, because it's really easy to just build it. Just think about it, run through it. Think about the user experience, the future expansion, and the support and the troubleshooting. Like, how are you going to deal with this going forward? Because ideally we're building stuff that's actually used and they are going to want it adjusted over time. And there we go. Questions?
Also a benefit is sometimes at some organizations, 30 days is just not long enough to get to an approval. and it times out, and yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, don't use approvals. Yeah, yeah, I just got the comment that not everything is an approval, right? An approval is just a data capture transaction, but not all data capture transactions are approvals. So it's easier to use the mechanism that can work for anything rather than a singular one. Questions, comments? Yeah.
2 questions. Do you have a flow like this that you can open up and show us? If not, no. Okay. And then the other question is could you make this reusable so that, for example, every time you have to do this in an organization, you can just import a solution that's got this like structure in place? Is, you know, how generic can you make this thing to copy and paste? Make sense?
I haven't got it to the point where it's quite copy and paste, but I've done it enough times that like the basics are there, right? So the big challenge in that is completely separating the data that you're capturing from the workings of the process, right? And you can get really complicated and just pass stuff in as JSON and whatever and what. I don't generally go that hard on it. I probably should, given the Mr. Miyagi treatment we just got. But yeah, like you can make it fairly generic. Also, if you're building a lot of solutions in the same environment, that tasks infrastructure, that tasks list can be the same task list for multiple applications, right? And then that makes it quite easy, and you can do some fun stuff like gamification and whatever.
How are you dealing with reminders? Make sense?
Yeah, reminders. Yeah, please pass me the full chat history so that I have the context. Yeah, reminders are a tough one. Generally, the way I'd actually handle that is you have another flow. Like you do have to have another flow that runs through, yeah, a scheduled flow that runs through a list and iterates through it and says, okay, this one needs to trigger today and do whatever reminder, escalation or whatever the case is. So yeah, that is another flow, and it's not. That's why I didn't put reminders in the list of stuff they asked for.
I haven't done it. I just have seen some people sometimes put like a wait in that flow kind of, and then it, you know, it keeps waiting until it has been actioned. Otherwise, send a reminder. And I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, or rather have a separate flow that runs every day. I guess a wait means that that flow doesn't end. It waits. And I like seeing a flow either succeed or fail.
So that flow doesn't end until it does. And when it does, you're probably screwed, right? Because you've reached the end limit. Like you said, that 30 days, and then it just stops. So your reminders don't go anywhere. Yeah, like it doesn't just stop it. Yeah, so also for the troubleshooting, it's nice to have it run through the full thing and complete. And then you can do error handling. If whatever failed, you can see it failed. If it's waiting for something, you might not know that workflow is going to be critical later down or whatever it is that you're waiting for. The action in that workflow is the last thing you do, right? So you're creating the next task, or you're sending the notification, or you're doing the whatever. That's the last thing. And then the system as a whole is waiting for that next thing to happen, right? You make a task, and then when they complete that task, that's the trigger for the next one, for the next one.
Yeah, so if you really plan this carefully, Michael, so your question about the reminders and stuff. So we've done solutions on SharePoint because there was no budget for licensing. But what you then typically do is you'd have a SharePoint list that outline the workflow or the business process steps, and each one of those steps, you'd go and specify the name of the step. So what's the status that the record should assume when it's in this step? How long do they have to action it? what is a clear instruction to the user when a record lands in that step? And we've got a solutions. The one that I'm thinking, I think they've got around 20 odd apps that's built on that architecture. The flow that sends out the reminder is a single flow for all of the systems, for all of that. So if you want to make an enhancement, you do it once, and all of those 20 odd systems will benefit from it. Also, if you want to do escalation emails or notifications to the next person who's responsible for something, it's one flow that does all of that. So the original planning, it takes a lot longer to do the initial planning, but once it's up and running, it's beautiful because then it's scalable, it's all of those sort of things, and it runs on SharePoint. Haven't seen it, no. And if it does, we'll just throw licensing at it. So.
Yeah, like the amount of scale that whatever system you're building does dictate that architecture a little bit. Like what you're describing there that's a very complicated one where you have a whole bunch of essentially mapping tables to say at each step, this is who's responsible when, how long, all of that. That is the best way to do it. And adding new pieces to that then becomes a lot easier and becomes a lot more extensible. And you should always build for that. But at some point, there's a tipping point. Sweet. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Laka, I think we're out of time.
Thanks, Rod. That was awesome. So everyone, thanks so much for tonight. Hope you found it worthwhile. Mike, that was amazing. Yeah, really well done. We've got 2 meetups left for the rest of the year. Yeah, we've got next month and December, so it's going quick. Okay, so perfect. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic evening. See you soon.
Yes, just bye.